Perek Habayis VA'ALIYA Daf Kuf Yud Ches, sponsored Lilui Nishmas Yecheskel ben Tzvi Yehuda. The Mishnah brings other cases of collapsed properties. Number one hollowed the side of a mountain to install an olive press. On the roof was a planted garden. The roof collapsed. The owner of the garden can plant on the floor of the press until the owner repairs the roof. The area collapsed is the same as the ceiling of a house. According to Rav, it has to be most of the roof, and according to Shmuel, it can be even 4x4 tvachim. Number two, privately owned wall or tree fell unexpectedly into the public domain, causing damage. The owner is exempt for damage caused by the fall or immediately after. He is liable for damage caused by not clearing away the rubble. If the court deemed the wall or tree a public hazard and gave the owner up to 30 days to take them down, any damage during that time is exempt. After, the owner is liable. Number three, a wall collapsed into a neighbor's garden and the owner gifted the stones to him. He does not have to accept them. He can demand the owner clear them away. However, if he accepted the offer, he is under no obligation subsequently to accept money for clearing them away to return the stones to the owner. Number four, one hired a worker to gather his straw. After he finished, the employer offered the straw as payment. He is under no obligation to accept it as payment. However, once he accepts the straw as payment, the worker is under no obligation to accept cash to forfeit the straw. The Gemara discusses the case of the wall collapsed into his neighbor's garden. The owner offered to reimburse his neighbor's expense to clear the rubble. It is then he can refuse the offer. He acquired by clearing them away. The Gemara questions why his garden does not acquire as soon as the owner gifts them. The Gemara answers the owner did not sincerely intend to transfer ownership. He was postponing clearing them away. However, when his neighbor cleared them away and he did not protest the gift, he can no longer claim his intention was merely to postpone. The Gemara now explains why both cases of stones and straw were necessary. In both cases, the owner's offer can be refused, but once accepted, the owner cannot renege. The stones are a gift, the straw is a wage. It could be assumed the worker accepted straw in place of cash. Alternatively, there is reason to assume the employer cannot renege on his offer to pay with straw, whereas stones are a gift, perhaps he can renege. The Gemara now brings a brisa that contradicts our Mishnah's law that the worker can refuse the straw as payment. The brisa claims the employer can force him to accept. The Gemara distinguishes in three ways, rejecting the first two. Number one, the Mishnah refers to a worker gathering straw on the employer's property. The brisa refers to working for a third party. The employer is not obligated to pay him. The Gemara disproves this. If the employer hired him, he is responsible to pay him. He can subsequently recover his payment from the third party. Number two, the Mishnah refers to straw owned by the employer, whereas the brisa refers to hefker, ownerless straw. Even after the worker gathers the ownerless straw, the employer does not acquire it. He can therefore force him to accept the straw as payment. The Gemara disproves this. If the employer hires him for any kind of work, it includes finding lost objects that consequently belong to the employer. In our case, the job description is to acquire ownerless straw. Number three, the Mishnah refers to Hagbah, acquiring the ownerless straw on behalf of the employer, whereas the brisa refers to Habata, watching, guarding it for the employer. Watching is not a valid form of acquisition. The Gemara elaborates on this law. The mitzvah of Omer and Shtei HaLechem are fulfilled during Shemitah, the sabbatical year, with svichim, barley and wheat that grew wild from seeds of the previous year. The community appoints guards to secure the growths for the mitzvah. There are three interpretations of the machlokas of Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanan, whether these guards are paid. Number one, according to the Rabbanan, the watchmen are paid from temple funds. As a result, they guard the growths with the intention to acquire them as paid watchmen on behalf of the community. Otherwise, they would acquire for themselves. They cannot acquire for the community by guarding unless they are their hired workers. Then they are the legal extension of their employers. Rabbi Yossi disagrees. They cannot acquire by guarding. Therefore, there is no point in paying them. Number two, Rava holds even Rabbi Yossi agrees they acquire by guarding. The argument is the Rabbanan were concerned without pay they would not transfer sincerely to the community. Rabbi Yossi was not concerned about this. Number three, another version of Rava. The Rabbanan agree one cannot acquire by guarding. They paid the guards so that those who would acquire the aftergrowths forcibly assumed the temple already acquired. Rabbi Yossi held there was no such takana. Now we move on to a new Mishnah. The owner of manure, number one, the owner of manure can place it in a public domain, but not leave it there. Number 2, one cannot soak or knead clay to make bricks or dry clay bricks in a public domain, but one may knead clay for immediate use as cement. Number 3, one who needs to transport building stones by way of a public domain cannot leave them there. If damage occurred in any of these cases, the owner is liable. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel holds that a builder can store materials for a month in a public domain in preparation for a job. The Gemara states that the Tana is not Rabbi Yehuda. He claims leaving manure in a public domain, piling it every 30 days so that animals and people would crush it to make it suitable for fertilizer was one of the ordinances promulgated by Yeshua when Am Yisrael entered Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yehuda exempted the owner for any injury caused by the manure. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, in our Mishnah, followed this opinion as well regarding building materials. Rabbi Shimon is the third opinion. He holds one that plasters under an oven 3 tefachim and a kira 1 tefach is exempt for any fire damage to floorboards. The last point of the Gemara is the distinction between schiras and kablonis regarding damage done by building materials. Workers building a house that are hired separately have no responsibility for damage once they finish their job. If they are hired together under one contract, they share responsibility for damage caused by one of the workers.